Theo
Yes.
and Corrie and Violet. How are you all today?
Great, thank you.
Lovely.
Good.
Good. So we've been talking back and forth for the last little bit around the issues when it comes to homelessness and how we can solve this problem. And one of the things that came up in this question was everybody's looking at it like it's a one-word solution. And today I wanted to talk with each of you on how we can tackle this problem as a society and really get on track on that. So Theo, you're with the Men's Center.
Yes.
Can you, what got you started in making the Men's Center?
The Men's Center has been running for 17 years, and when I first got involved, I really saw a need, specifically originally around fathers losing their children, being cut out of their families through a variety of reasons, either institutional barriers, economic challenges, not enough money to go to court and gain a semblance of access. And also men themselves have, psychological barriers that prevent them from moving forward. So that was originally it. And I think as the Men's Center has evolved, we've seen there are a lot of challenges in today's society for men in particular that are quite unique. And certainly there are counselors and counseling agencies out there who deal with a holistic perspective on families. But I think there are some unique aspects to men in society today that are very challenging, and there aren't a lot of resources. And I think the one big symptom there's a lot of symptoms, like the opioid crisis, like homelessness, but male suicide is 4-1 versus women, 8-1 for men going through divorce, and 12-1 for men going through divorce over men over 65. So why are men taking their own lives so much more frequently than women? I think is a big question. I haven't seen a definitive answer. I think there's a lot of reasons. So there's a lot of things going on in society today as we're changing, as feminism has changed society in ways that are good for women, are great for women, and have created more equality. And we're not there yet. There's still places where that inequality exists. But in that process, I think that men, and particularly fathers, have been left behind. So for me, that was the original impetus. And as I've gotten more involved in the issues, I've started to see all those issues connected rather than in isolation. And I think one of the reasons that we as a society are not dealing with some of these issues is because we haven't come up with solutions that are holistic and see those connected dots, see those lines between the issues, like homelessness and the opioid crisis. And we're looking at university enrollment now is almost down to 40% for males. So all of these, I think, are symptoms of a society that is ignoring the issues that men are facing. So that's what got me started.
So when you started the Men's Resource, it was 17 years ago, right?
2002 is when we opened the doors, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was suicide an issue then, or did you find that to become an issue?
I wasn't aware at the time that it was an issue, personally. But I think I don't know what the male suicide rate was at that time, but I do know that it was higher than women. And it has, where it is now, is about 4-1. 3.5, 4-1, depending on what studies you look at. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So with the Men's Resource Center now, is most of the work that you're doing around counseling for men that are struggling with suicide or family issues or domestic violence, where do you find most of your resources being used?
They're all part of the picture. We have free counseling for men and for women and for couples. But most of our clients are male. About 30% of our clients are Aboriginal or First Nations. And we deal with all those issues. We deal with men with drug addiction issues, mental health issues. Probably the predominant issues that we deal with are around domestic violence, around fathers losing their children, having to go to court, family court. We deal with perpetrators and victims, and male perpetrators and male victims in domestic violence. So we're doing a lot of different things to try and help men. One of the barriers that we see right now is the stigma around men asking for help. I mean, there's the old joke about men don't ask for help, men don't ask for directions, and there's some truth to that because it's in our DNA to be independent. It's in our DNA to protect our families. It's in our we've been doing that for thousands of years, going back to caveman days. So it's part of our nature to do that. And so the stigma of asking for help puts a lot of men in the psychological position of that's weak, or that's, I don't need to ask for help, I can do it myself. And that's a piece that, surprisingly, in today's society of social media and information, is still a big impediment for a lot of men. They don't know how to ask for help, and they won't ask for help because they consider it to be weak, because the people around them consider it to be weak. So that's a big piece.
So it's interesting because even in my own life, that's been a part of it, is that you get to a point where you're like, that things are so bad, then it's like, okay, maybe I need to go get some support now. But in that case, even then, I mean, as a child, you're brought up to boys don't cry, boys don't ask for help. That's all a part of it. And that stigma lays out even further, because once you're in a situation of unemployment, or you're struggling, or you've got some other issues going on, there's an individual aspect of like, well, that guy's struggling. He's just got to smarten up and figure his stuff out. Instead of, he needs support. He needs to make sure that works.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we see, and it's a real pattern actually, is so as you just alluded to, men get to a point of crisis, and then they'll come and ask for help, and we'll help them through a crisis, and then they'll disappear for 6 months or a year, and then we'll see them at their next crisis, rather than, and we encourage them, keep coming, you're feeling great, your things are going well, keep coming, because you want to prepare for that next downturn. But a lot of men don't do that, so we see them only in crisis, which, at the end of the day, they don't change the pieces in their own psychological puzzle that will help prevent the next crisis. So that's a problem. And you alluded to, is it the individual's fault, or that they're in the situation they're in if they're out on the street, for instance? And what we do try and teach people is not that it's their fault, but if they don't take responsibility for having arrived at a place, there's no way that they can arrive at a solution to get them out of that place. So there's a personal accountability piece that's really important. What we try and do is empower people to do it themselves rather than doing it for them. But having said that, we're also, we're not individuals living in, a cave by ourselves. We live in a society that has institutions, and some of those institutions create barriers as well, like family court, and as far as parents not being able to see their kids, those kinds of things that so they may create some of their own barriers, but they're also up against institutions that aren't necessarily helpful. And whether that's fathers not seeing their children, or homelessness, or the opioid crisis, or whatever. So I think as a society we need to help individuals, but we also need to look at changing how some of the institutions work.
So speaking of institutions, we have Island Crisis Care Society here. So Violet, can you tell us, when did you start with Island Crisis Care?
Sure. I actually had been working with the Salvation Army for quite a few years, and was living in Nanaimo and driving down to Duncan and working down there. And so then I actually saw, I think 3 different times, I saw an ad for a program director at Samaritan House. And so I think on the 3rd time I saw it, I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'm supposed to apply for that. So I did. I applied for that position and was successful. And that was March the 1st, 2010, because it's coming up for 10 years. And so I started there. I worked for about a year and a half in the program at Samaritan House. So that's why Samaritan House is really important to me. And then the executive director of the time, she retired, and so then I applied for that position, and I moved into the executive director position.
Wow.
So,
and Corrie, you've been here for about a year now?
About a year, yeah. So I joined Island Crisis Care Society almost exactly a year ago and came in as resource development. I have a little bit a different background. I actually was an entrepreneur for a while, and I've worked in media and communications and lots of different places. But I actually also worked for the Salvation Army for a short time, and then moved to Nanaimo and worked for another nonprofit here, and then heard about the job at Island Crisis, and it was a really good fit for where my heart is at, where my passions are, and so I joined, and then have just moved into the assistant executive director role recently. But yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about that connection between being an entrepreneur and working for a nonprofit, and it's such a, it's a great opportunity to practice my skill set in a lot of different areas, because we're
could be a jack of all.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, capturing that passion, seeing a need in the community, which you see anytime you walk or drive anywhere in the city right now. I come back to the story, just around when I started, just thinking about the need, and you hear all these people saying, well, they could just get a job, they could get things, and if you really take it back and think about the people that you see on the street, the people that you see experiencing these issues, and imagine what their life was like as a child, and I look at my own kids and I think, why is this fair, right? Why do my kids get the support that they need, and these folks didn't, or had it in a different way, and ended up in the position they're at? And I couldn't, that was something that I couldn't walk away from. And so when the job at Island Crisis came up, that was...
Yeah, that reminds me, my own daughter, who's 29, said to me, probably a year ago, Mum, if you think about it, you remember 5 years ago when I got into all sorts of credit card debt and I just messed up, and she said, you took me back home. She said, what would have happened if I didn't have you here? Where would I be today? And so, if we think about that, we all make mistakes in our lives, and it easily could turn around for any one of us, right? And it's not even necessarily a mistake. It can be a health concern. Someone's, diagnosed with, a mental health issue, or even sometimes a physical health thing, and they lose their job, and things start spiraling. If you haven't got a whole bunch of money put aside for those times when things don't quite go the way you think, we all could be in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing some work on that whole helping people to understand that there are different stories and different things that have led people to where they're at, and asking the general public to think about their own life and think about the journey that they've had and the challenges that they've overcome or things that they're going through in their lives right now. And, you know, we often hear, well, I made it through a difficult time in my life. Why can't anyone? But really think about what resources that you had. And it might have just simply been the resiliency that you got from growing up the way that you did, or it might be financial stability, or it might be family support, or it might be faith, it might be having a community around you. A lot of times, those of us who've been through struggles, if we look at our past and look at our journey, we've had those resources, and yet for so many people in our community, they just simply don't have those resources. And so to say, why can't they just get a job and get over it? That's not fair to say, right? They don't have access to the support that they need. And so that's, I think as an organization, that's where our heart lies, in helping people to have access to the supports that they don't otherwise have in their lives.
Yeah, we've been trying to do some interviews with people and put them on our website to tell those stories, because, you know, they just are so relevant, because it really helps us to understand and change the perspective of us being better than other people. You know, that we really all are human beings, you know, with the same goals and objectives in life to do well. You know, I don't think any child says, oh, I want to be living on the streets or be addicted to something when I grow up. Like, we all have hopes and dreams for the future.
Yeah, it's kind of it's an interesting perspective, because it's something that I've been really thinking about over the last little bit, is more when I see people now, especially when they're struggling on the street or whatever, that they were once babies, that they were somebody's child at one point, and that they didn't wish that for themselves, and now they're stuck in a situation or struggling in a situation that, and they have a story behind them. There's something going on there, and it's heartbreaking to watch it, and it helps to change your perspective when you think about it that way, when you look at the situation for what it is. It's interesting because I keep coming back to this idea between, is it the individual or is it the system? And I think there's a mix between the two of that, you know, because I've been in difficult situations in my life, and I know how I got there and how I got myself out of it. So that, for me, it's an individual thing. And so I'm much more hard-hearted when I see someone else struggling, because I'm like, well, you can get out of that situation. But I think there's a system breakdown too.
I mean, I think going back to what Theo said, right, is that there's this stigma that for generations and generations, and even more like in the current society that we live in, we encourage independence. We encourage people to be on their own and be self-sustaining and figure it out for themselves and, you know, just buck up and get over it. We've encouraged that. And so, yes, there is personal responsibility that people make changes for themselves and make choices for themselves and gather that strength for themselves. But as a society, we don't teach those things anymore. We don't, you know, there's kind of a piece that's missing, right? We need to be supporting the individual so that the individual can make those choices, and that support piece is, I think, what's missing.
But even affordability. I mean, I think when we bought our first house, it was $47,000. Like, I mean, a young person now trying to get ahead and buy a house, like, I mean, 400 and something if they're fortunate.
In Nanaimo,
Yeah.
never mind Vancouver, Victoria.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you even, you know, get there it
is an interesting dilemma between society and institutions and the individual. And there's pieces in both. There's, as an individual, we do, in this society in particular, encourage individuality, free thinking, take care of yourself, but we don't teach it very well, certainly in our educational institutions. And but we also have in any one of the issues that we look at, whether it's homelessness, whether it's the opioid crisis, whether it's fathers losing their children, whether it's domestic violence, we have institutions that supposedly are there to put a container around individuals' behavior. And a lot of those institutions are not working very well. So that free thinking, if you will, and the intent of the institutions is good. But for instance, when you have an institution like FMEP, Family Maintenance Enforcement Program, the whole focus of that program is to essentially force non-paying, non-custodial parents to provide financial support. That's a great purpose and intention. But what we've created as a society is an institution that says money is more important than contact. Mm-hmm. So we have, and I think it's about 98% of payers in the FMEP program are fathers. It's 98 or 99%. Partly that's because mothers more frequently get custody, and that still reflects a very traditional society that we've had for many years. But what I've always found really disturbing is that in our society we've evolved this focus on the financial support over and above the personal contact. Mm-hmm. There is no agency anywhere in Canada that enforces the contact. So what used to happen in the 80s is we had parents fighting with each other, and one parent would say, well, you can't see the kids if you don't pay me child support, and the other parent would say, okay, I'll give you child support and so they had their power struggle, and basically the government, the state stepped in and said, no, we want to make sure that children are properly supported. That's great, but what got left out in the process, so now we have custodial parents going into court and saying, I'm not getting child support, and being forced to pay the non-custodial parent, and that's all fine and good. But a parent who can't see their kids will not get government support. There is no agency that will enforce that. And to me, that's lopsided. They're both really important, obviously, but we focused on one and not the other. So where does that bring us in terms of tragedies? Well, we have I'm aware of fathers being ordered to pay more child support than they actually make in a month. So those kinds of things put people on the street. Those kinds of things create crisis. Those kinds of things create domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And so there's all kinds of repercussions. We've set up institutions that have this domino effect on how individuals behave in our society. And those individuals then go from one bureaucracy to getting in trouble with another bureaucracy. And so it goes. And so you end up homeless, drug addicted. There's all kinds of
and we know, looking at what we offer, the services we offer and clients that we see, we've talked about this at length, right? That there's always, there's more to a story than just one issue at a time. And so you look at that example. So, the father who now is paying more than they can afford and ends up homeless. But what happens to those children who didn't have access to their both parents in a healthy way?
Right.
And they may feel that they've been abandoned by their father, and they may have been told that.
Yes.
It might not be true, but then they believe that they've been abandoned, and it just spirals.
We're just back into that cycle.
It dominoes through generations now. Yeah.
So it's hard, right? Like there is no one cure for all of the issues, except that I think we need to recognize the connection. We need to recognize that people are holistic. People are made up of all sorts of different parts, and just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean that they are this issue. They may have a whole history that we don't know, and I think that's has been our focus in helping our community to understand that people have journeys and people have stories and people have paths that they've come down, and you can't make a judgment call and say that person is homeless, they have a substance use issue, and they have a mental health issue. They are in this package. They need to just get a job and get over it, because you don't know what's gone on in their past. And so until we start seeing people as people rather than as the issues, I don't think we're going to get very far with it.
And when we talk to people and say to them, you know, when you're on the street, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be out on the street asking for help. But when you see people, and we ask them, you know, when you're on the street, what do you hope will happen? And you know what the number one answer is? They want to be seen. They want someone to recognize that they're there. And we all do it. I've been guilty of it. You walk by and maybe you don't have any money on you. And so you look the other way and you just keep going, right?
Yeah.
But what they actually want is they want you to say hello to them. Just recognize them as a person. Because they are a person. And just because they're at that point in their lives doesn't make them any less.
Or simply to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a cigarette or money or whatever it is you're asking for. It was because we were talking about this earlier before the camera started rolling, which is always the best kind of conversations. But we were talking about digging yourself out of the hole once you're in the hole. And you know, it was something that it startled me was the idea that, okay, so my address is now 250 Terminal. And I want to get out of there, and I want to have my own apartment. But landlords are not gonna, when they see that address, they're no. Or if I want to get a job, that's the other part of it too. So how does a person break out of that? Is it possible? Like how do you get to the next stage?
Hopefully discussions like this, because that's the one thing that our outreach workers are finding now is that, you know, they're helping, they're supporting to try and find, you know, their own place, because they've moved beyond the point where they need the supports. They now are ready to go out on their own, but they face that 250. No, they won't even look at the application.
And people are going through so much, and getting yourself back up on your feet after going through, you know, whatever it's been is hard enough. And then you put that stigma of, you know, judgment from the community or people feeling like you were this way once, so therefore you're always going to be like this. Like it's heartbreaking that that's what we do as a society. And it's not to say, I mean, people have fears, and you can't dismiss those fears. You know, landlords and employers have fears about
because they've been burned,
taking a chance, right, on somebody. But you know, so it's not an easy solution, but it just needs to be acknowledged that somebody's got to give people a chance. Somebody's got to be willing to see that person as a person. And I think I could easily say from our experience, when someone is given that chance, when someone is seen for who they are as a human being, the success rate in those stories are huge. Just because suddenly they are starting to be valued and
they start to believe in themselves.
Yeah. We had, the clean team in Parksville is a good example of that, right? There's an article today about the clean team at our Orca Place in Parksville, and these folks that are residents at Orca Place are feeling valued. They're feeling purpose because they've got a job to do in the community, and they're going to make the community better, and they're excited about that.
What have they done? Like, what is the clean team?
So they just go around the community and they're picking up litter on the streets and just basically cleaning up the community.
Great.
And the one fellow that was interviewed, you know, talked about how this has given him purpose. So now he has a purpose, and his main purpose was that he wanted to change people's opinion of whoever is living in this supportive housing, because there's been so much stigma about what type of people are living there.
Right.
So he discovered that his purpose was to go out and show them that, you know, he is a person that cares about the community.
Right.
Yeah. So it's been impressive.
Yeah. So your clients and the clients of the Men's Center all have to deal with stigma, but I think the services that you provide, the services that we provide, also give them a leg up.
Yes.
Also create a foundation of security. They're not on the street. Yes, maybe there's a stigma attached to the address, and maybe there's a stigma about men getting counseling, but it still gives them a sense of more groundedness. And when you're on the street, how do you look for a job? How do you dress up for an interview? It's almost impossible to do. So when there's some supportive housing, when there's some support with counseling to, well, how do I approach an interview? I worked at my job for 15 years. I haven't had an interview in 15 years. I don't even know how to do this. So when they get that kind of support and it helps build up their self-esteem, it does help to make them more productive members of society. So that's really important, but it's only, a small drop because the resources aren't there. I mean, we're overwhelmed, you're overwhelmed. There's stuff going on in our society there's waves and waves of people who are not fitting in, who are feeling, who are left homeless, whether they're on the street or whether they're couch surfing. And there's not enough resources to go around.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize as well that there are some people who will need to stay in supportive housing.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
There are we have lots of people with brain injuries.
Yeah.
And success for them is simply staying housed, and I think of one particular woman that we had, and success for her was, yes, that she stayed with us and she didn't keep going off, and she was an amazing artist.
Right.
To be able to do that art, and that was her success. She would not be at the point where she'd be going out to get a job because her brain injury would preclude that, but that was her success, and for us that was our success as well, because she now was a happy, supported individual.
Right.
And so it really is different for every person.
I think you comment, and it's just a normal thing that we say all the time. It's when a person is a productive member of society. That's the goal for people. I think that we're doing that backwards. I think that as a society, we give people value when they become a productive member of society in some level, whatever that looks like, where if we would go backwards a little bit and say, actually, no, you have value because you're a person, because you're a human being, and then watch what happens when you do that. When you remind somebody that they have value and they have worth simply because they're there, and then see where they go. And success looks different for different people. But let's start at the beginning, and changing the perspective of the community is crucial.
What is success even, and what is value? Yeah.
So both of you have talked about being overwhelmed with not able to provide the resources that are needed. So what can our communities do to help you?
Well, our biggest challenge has always been funding. From day one, every year we struggle to survive, and we manage our resources in terms of counselors and staff based on the funding that we manage to get, and that's a juggling act every single year, and we always start the year out with not enough funding to see us through the whole year. So that presents all kinds of challenges around planning. Long-term planning is really impossible when you're dealing with survival. So that's been our challenge, and we manage our resources based on the funding. And yes, we have volunteers to fill the gaps. But we need a certain amount of expertise to deal with different kinds of challenges and clients. Volunteers are not always equipped to deal with, some client challenges. So that's, how do we deal with being overwhelmed? Our hours are limited. We're only open 3 days a week. We'd like to be open 5 days a week. And that's a funding challenge. Getting qualified staff to run the men's center is also a challenge. People want full-time jobs, not necessarily part-time jobs. So we've managed to stay alive for 17 years with a delicate balance of funding and community support in terms of volunteers and donations. Generally, in any given year, we get as much from the community in-kind support and volunteer support as we actually get in cash revenues from various sources. So it's been a fine balancing act, but ultimately we're there to provide resources for individuals who need help, and all we can do is the best that we can do with the resources that we have. So we do struggle with that, definitely, because there is a need that's much larger than we're able to provide or deal with. And I'm sure it's the same for you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in a slightly different situation in that we have, for our programs, we do have government funding for most of them, but where our challenge comes in is in capacity. We find, like I mentioned, we have traditionally been quite innovative, and we're always looking, and so we're always having people approach us with different needs, and or other agencies approaching us and wanting to work around different needs in the community. But then it's for us to have the capacity to start a new program or be able to join with another organization to work on a particular need. So the funding provides for the programs, but as far as us having the ability to have enough staff to work on those, to have those resources, I think that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think for any nonprofit, funding is our lifeblood. It's what keeps the doors open, keeps us going. And Violet is right that it is a little bit different situation that we do have some stable funding for our programs, but it's being able to offer those additional supports and those extra things, and to develop partnerships and develop collaboration opportunities. But I think the other thing that that we recognize absolutely is a huge need from the community is in the support and the just willingness for people to come alongside us in the work that we're doing. And I think that any nonprofit would feel the same way. So, I mean, volunteers are great, but it is very specialized. There's not always opportunity for volunteers to work because we're working with people who are incredibly vulnerable, and there's a certain training that's required for that. But, oftentimes in our programs, we face so much opposition from the community. And it's heartbreaking, right? When we know our goal is to support those in need. That's it. The Island Crisis Care's mission statement is to provide shelter and care to those in need. That's it. And yet we have opposition, and how, when you're working so hard against, all these odds for people who are just like at the most difficult place in their lives, and all the hard work that goes into that, and then you have opposition from the communities on top of that. It's very difficult, right? It's very difficult to put one foot in front of the other when you feel like, everybody is against you because they're not seeing what you see. They're not seeing the hope and the stories and the goodness.
We get accused all the time of enabling people. Just enabling them to stay in that situation. But that's not our goal at all. But we just recognize that it takes time. Like, not everyone gets well, just like that. You have relapses. You go through different cycles in your life. But I mean, our goal is definitely to see people well, whatever well that is. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the same for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. When we think about what we need from the community, it's just simply recognition that we're doing the very best we can. You're doing the very best you can with the resources that we have. And not everybody might agree with the approach. Not everybody might agree with, the tools that we're using or how we're doing things. But we're doing what we can to fit the need that's there. And so if people in the community would just take a moment to recognize that, and instead of, we talked about that siloing thing that happens, that, people kind of do the us and them and say, well, I don't support what's happening over there, so I'm just gonna toss it all out. That's not helpful. It's not helpful to anybody.
I hear your disappointment around that, and I empathize with it because we get that too. I mean, the work that you do is slightly different than what we do, and I hear that you would like to add more supports to what you do, and what we do is that kind of support and maybe more preventative. But we get that too. We get opposition to what we're doing, and my take on that is that people don't always understand, and they don't want to take the time to understand. And they project their own fears, they project their own sometimes selfish agendas onto the situation, rather than maybe asking questions with curiosity. Because what I see us sitting around this table, we're talking about huge social problems that are not they're not specific to Nanaimo. They're specific to North America, Western society, and we're just doing a little bit to try and help. And certainly we make mistakes, but solutions to those mistakes are not necessarily through confrontation and criticism, but through constructive dialogue. And so how could we do that differently? So when you're sitting in a situation and you're dealing with a problem that needs to be resolved today, you're making decisions based usually on not 100% of the information. That's a pretty difficult place to arrive at. And so sometimes you make mistakes. If people became more involved, whether through donation or volunteerism or just constructive dialogue, then we can get to a place, and the more constructive dialogue you have, the more voices, the more perspectives, the more able you really are to get able to arrive at a solution that works for everyone. So but what we find is that people make projections about what we do. They don't really understand what we do. They don't ask questions, and they make assumptions, negative assumptions at times. And it's not helpful. It's not helpful to us. It's not helpful to the clientele. It's not helpful for the community. So how do we engage people in more constructive dialogue? I think what we're doing here is one way of doing that. And certainly there are other ways.
It's interesting. We see a lot of social media stuff. There's a lot of dialogue, whether it's constructive or not, I'm not sure, but a lot of dialogue on social media. And it tends to go in a negative direction often. And it's interesting because organizations like us, and I think to you to an extent as well, and probably any other nonprofit organization in the community, we just don't have the resources or the time to sit on social media and respond to everything that's said, and share information and share facts and share details. And so it's really hard because it feels like we're always up against all of this negativity coming towards us. We're open, and I think you are as well, that if people have questions, just come to us and talk to us and have this dialogue, have these conversations one-on-one, because that's the best way to really create that connection, not through, on and on that cycle of negative comments and accusations and telling each other how we're doing things wrong. But let's meet on the level playing field and have really good conversations about how we can support our community better.
Well, you guys are kind of stuck in a stigma too, because when you think about, we're a marketing agency, and so when we deal with businesses, they have a budget, they're set out to spend money in their marketing. It's a part of their business acumen to build forward. You know that because you're an entrepreneur, and so are you, Theo. So when you've got a non-profit organization and you're trying to put together a marketing budget, and right off the bat, what happens when people are saying, well, why are you spending money on your marketing? to raise donations.
Mm-hmm.
So you're struggling with that.
Yeah. Or why are you spending money on, putting together messages to share to the community, and yet if we don't do that, well, why didn't you respond to that, or why didn't you say something to that? So it's always it's a very fine line that you walk as a nonprofit.
It was interesting because even with the men's center last year, you were about to close the doors.
We were about to close the doors because we didn't have enough money. We just didn't have enough money to make it through, and we did do a social media campaign, which you were involved in, and it kept us alive. It saw us through. It got us publicity. We had some amazing people step forward in the community to support us, not only in Nanaimo, but around the province, actually. And we got some government support. We got local support from foundations and a lot of individuals, which to me was incredibly heartwarming to have people step up and say, we want this in our community. So that was great. The disappointment for me around all of that is that we're still the only men's center in all of British Columbia. And, why aren't there more resources for fathers, for men in the whole province? It confounds me in a lot of ways. I understand it intellectually. I understand the resistance, but to me it's such an obvious need, and such a really, when you consider a provincial budget in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, we're probably I don't know what the provincial budget is, but it must be in the billions. So, when we're talking a couple of $1 million to fully support a center here or in some other community in British Columbia, it just boggles my brain that the decision makers, the gatekeepers, the bureaucrats don't seem to really understand not only the need, but that iceberg, all that other stuff that flows out of that, the homelessness, the opioid crisis, all of those pieces, they're not going to go away. I mean, you can throw billions of dollars at it, it's not going to go away. But you can certainly create an environment where there's more safety for vulnerable people, and people are getting help. And that all turns around and makes for a healthier society.
If we can start supporting people before they get to a crisis point. And so with the services you offer, absolutely that's what you're doing with us. Looking at our outreach program, right, that we can we can offer supports to people in maintaining housing and just getting that extra what they need, or helping them out with health issues and that sort of thing. If we can start, absolutely the programs need to exist for people who are in crisis, without a doubt, and that's what we focus on. But if we can also, it's not kind of an or situation, it's an and situation. If we can also provide resources for people before they get to that point, so that they don't end up having something, domestic situation spiral out of control, and they end up on the street in substance use, whatever it is. If we can just get to it before that, and that's where the community support comes in. If we can get the donations and the funding to help us with those programs, that maybe the funders haven't recognized those in the same way, and they are recognizing them and they are supporting in certain ways, but it's an opportunity for community to get on board and to come alongside in those ways.
And it's complementary. Well, what you do in terms of providing housing, and you talk about some services to complement that, but you'd like to do a lot more. And in the services we provide, it's all very complementary. It goes together. The prevention is important, and the sort of basic housing is important. But if you can provide support systems with the housing, then you're looking at a much better fit and a much better result at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I talked the other day with Glenn about some collaboration in Orca Place with one of your programs that you're offering. So I think, So I think the more that we can do that and work together and recognize that we all have a part to play, the better it will be. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about why we're all here for a minute. So we've all collaborated and worked on building a program that helps raise some funds for both of you, which you both desperately need. But it also helps to change perspectives, the stigma that people have around homelessness, and people in crisis, and men in crisis, and women in crisis. And so what we're talking about is the disposable camera photo contest that is going to be out in the new year, called Changing Perspectives. And we're still in the process of going out and getting some funding. So if anybody would be like to be a part of that as a sponsor, we've got some pretty amazing packages for that. So I know Andrew and the team here have been working hard to put that together. The website's almost finished right now. So the whole idea behind that is we're going to be providing, I think the budget is around 100 disposable cameras right now to who are people who are in crisis, and they can take photos in 8 different categories. And then we're also providing cameras that disposable camera kits that people can buy in retailers here in Nanaimo, and they can also be a part of it. And the idea is at the end of the day, we're going to take professional and amateur and people who are struggling with homelessness, and we're going to be looking at their photos, and I'm hoping at the end of this, especially with the quality of talent that's here, that people can begin to realize that there really is no difference between someone who is just starting out with photography or someone who's struggling with that we can see that there's a thing. So, and then from there, we'll be selling those photos. All of that will go to support both of your amazing organizations, which is why we got involved. And every year we do that. We try to do this with one organization. So last year, I know with Box 221, we wanted to really spend some time and help you out, and you had some great supporters. Hunter Men in Nanaimo stepped up, and Tony Harris. Desire Tattoo came out of nowhere to support you. And what I found the most interesting is that each person in some indirect way has been touched by the Men's Resource Center, and they all came through to support you, which was amazing. And so we're hoping for that again this year. And then meeting with you and working with Island Crisis Care has been amazing. So if people want to directly support you, they can go to Island Crisis Care Society, and there's a donation page.
Yeah, islandcrisiscaresociety.ca. We do have a donation page. We also have a page through Canada Helps if people are more comfortable. And we also take checks and cash in the office. Lots of ways to support us financially. And
Men's Resource Center, Men's Center?
Yeah, same thing. We've got donate buttons on our website through PayPal or credit card, and we'll take cash or checks. And it's the web address is themenscenter.ca.
And so on that, we're getting very close to Christmas. If you've got an opportunity and you've got some extra funds and you want to support 2 amazing causes within our city, do that, please. I think there's some real need for that. So all your funding is coming up again for the new year. Is the Men's Resource Center? Are we good for funding for this next year? Are we going to be struggling?
Well, currently we're waiting on some government funding, which we'll see. We've been told we'll find out end of January, but there's no guarantee with that. We're good till the end of March. which
Okay.
is not that far away.
No, no. Well, hopefully we can make a change to that.
Mm.
And I think that one of the big things that we're working on is we think that the Changing Perspectives initial budget should bring in some much needed funds for both of your organizations.
And the one thing that I just want to say that I love is that it levels the playing field. When we think about people in all walks of life, this disposable camera, it levels it. And there's not someone with a fancy camera as opposed to someone with a basic camera. Like, it just levels it. And that's how we hope, like, that, you know, our society will be, that everyone is equal.
I mean, Violet and I are privileged. We're blessed that we get to see people in our programs, and the stories are amazing. The human beings that are living there are just lovely individuals, and the idea that we could have this photo competition that will allow them to, you know, there's such creative people that have something that they want to share with the community and something that they want to share, and that this event, this competition, would give them the opportunity to share, you know, their perspective and have that sit alongside other people's perspectives in the community is really cool. It's a really awesome idea. So
Well, it gives value, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea, that everyone has value regardless of where they're at.
Yeah.
And the whole concept. I mean, I've been sold on this concept from the beginning. The concept of taking pictures, it eliminates the need to articulate with words. It's pictures are stories, and you know, you talk about your clients having incredible stories, but some people aren't as good at using words to articulate their stories. They're better with images, and I think this gives an opportunity to a whole variety of people, our clients, your clients, to articulate their story with an image, a simple image, a complicated image, whatever their story is, and that's a form of expression that allows them. You know, you said before, one of the biggest feedbacks you get from people on the street, what do you want from people? We want to be seen. This allows them to be seen.
very cool.
So any final thoughts before we conclude this video interview today? Everybody's pretty happy? That's all.
Yeah.
Did you mention the website address?
Oh yeah, changingperspectives.ca. Yeah, so the website, we're just building it right now. I think we should have it ready for next week. Maybe by the time we put out this video, it'll be up. So that's what we're working on right now. That's part of our contribution to making this happen. And if somebody would like to become a sponsor to the event, they can either contact myself at scott@box221.com or Andrew at box221.com, and we'll be happy to get that started. Or they can contact you directly. But obviously we want to go through the sponsorship packages with them and make sure that they get everything that they want to do, and do a great interview like this with them as well, and help other people realize that there is true community support out there. But unfortunately, it all seems to get caught in this whole weird stigma that happens within our.
Thank you to Box 221 for doing this.
It's okay.
Huge.
Yeah, really, from the bottom of my heart, I know why you're doing this, and I know it's not about money. I know that you're doing this because you really care, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I mean, it wasn't easy for me. I've gone through my struggles too. So, it's one of those kind of things that once you've been there and struggled, that you find that that if you can help others get through that, it makes your own struggle make more sense in the end of it all. All right. Well, that's everything I think for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Wow, that was fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't have a ticket.
Yeah.